Boredom and welcome to the InstaSim channel. I recently watched a series on YouTube by someone called Batchy on growing up Scottish and thought about making a series on growing up Welsh. So after receiving the result from this poll on Twitter, which I will put a screenshot on the screen, I decided to go ahead with this project. So in today's episode of Growing Up Welsh, I decided to talk about school life here in Wales. This is going to be in two parts, which will be the first part about primary schools and the second part about secondary schools. So before I begin talking about how school life is in Wales, it's important to understand how education works here in the UK in general. Since 1997, a thing known as devolution swept across the nation to allow the four nations of the UK to govern themselves on certain issues. One such issue that was devolved in each nation, which you've probably guessed already, was education. So how the system works here in Wales is a little bit different to how the rest of the UK works, although there are some subtle similarities. In fact, Scotland is probably the nation with the most amount of differences in the education system, but that's not the topic of this video, so we're gonna actually go on to the topic of discussion. So to begin this video, we're gonna go right to the beginning with primary schools, as you probably know already. So anyone who doesn't know what a primary school is, it's basically the first school you go to. Most people would start here at the age of 3 or 4, depending on how you want to say it, and you finish here at the age of 11. The first year of primary school is known as nursery, only consisted of half days, where you would start at 9 in the morning and finish at 11:30. But at the same time, you didn't really have to go here either, seeing how you can't really force 3-year-olds to leave their parents. Except me though, because I got bored at home and wanted to learn. You see, I was a pretty independent kid, but that's a topic for another episode. Here in Wales, there was one thing we learned which we would use for the entire time we were at primary school, from nursery to year 6, and it was how to say good morning and good evening in Welsh. Anyone who went through the primary school system in Wales would remember this till the day they die, seeing how it was drilled into our tiny brains to go Boredom, Mrs. Jones, Boredom, pow, at the beginning of every day and before you went home, to the point where the recitation becomes zombified. If there's more than one member of staff in the classroom at the end of the day, you'd have to go through the entire roll call of staff before you were allowed to leave. I'm sure I remember a time where there was like 4 or 5 members of staff in the room at the time we were saying Pnawnda at the end of the day, and as you guessed, we went through everyone, with the whole thing lasting about a minute or two. When it came to discipline, I was a pretty well-behaved pupil, and even if we did something bad, having to stay in at break time or lunchtime was usually the punishment we were given. I remember one time at the very end of year 6 when I was time wasting, but then what could they expect? I was bored as hell in that year anyway. So I was made to stay in for 5 minutes of break time. Sure, I felt bad, but I'm sure there were much worse punishments than we could have been given. Another thing I did was, during a sports day at my primary school, me and my friend were jumping over this patio wall because we were incredibly bored, and although a teacher told us to stop, we still carried on. Even though we all pretty much ignored him when he told us, I was the only one who got into trouble for it. And by getting into trouble for it, I mean he shouted incredibly loud at me for it. Okay, I probably deserved it, but at the very least he could have had all of us together to share the blame, not just me by myself. Now, I didn't like this particular teacher, and I could tell that he didn't like me all that much either. But come on, double standards match. Then again, I didn't carry on jumping over this wall, so I suppose it worked. I suppose this was more me than anyone else, but in the last years of primary school, I really hated it. I was bored for most of the time, or I didn't like doing the work. I had subjects I enjoyed, such as maths and Welsh, and in those I did pretty well. But in years 5 and 6, our teacher wasn't there most of the time, so we were stuck with the headmistress. I wouldn't have been so bad had she actually taught us something enjoyable though. She was all into art and things, whereas I hated art, and no matter what I did, she'd always find something wrong about it. Yeah, great motivation there, telling me that I'm useless at things. I suppose it wasn't much help either that our year was really small with only around 11 pupils, so we were taken out of normal lessons often to spend time with the headmistress doing work. It was also no help that I wasn't really into all the outdoor activities either. Again, something the headmistress swore by doing. The only one I remotely enjoyed was this thing called Classe de Mer, which was a boat trip along the Menai Strait. But things like canoeing, nah, I ain't doing that. Last time I went canoeing with my primary school, I was with a group of people I didn't like, where all of them ditched me, and we were left for like 5 minutes in the middle of the water. One time I actually asked if we had to go canoeing, and the headmistress said that we did because it was part of the curriculum. I didn't go anyway, but I remember 2 of my friends didn't go either, so we were sent to help out with nursery and reception pupils during the day instead. One of my favourite days ever in year 6, might I add. The last thing on primary schools I am going to talk about is something I'm going to kind of steal from Batchy's video, and it's to do with the school lunches. Now, when I was a kid, I was a bit fussy with what I eat, and I was normally on sandwiches anyway. I wasn't really incredibly fussy like some people are, but I knew what I liked and knew what I disliked, and usually try and avoid the foods I disliked. As a kid, I was also not overly keen on meat products, so I'd usually ask to not have some meats like beef or chicken. And occasionally I'd be substituted for the vegetarian option, and I would admit if I wasn't into ham, I would have probably turned vegetarian right there and then, because the veggie pasties they made at my primary school were absolutely gorgeous. But what I mostly looked forward to was the dessert. Desserts at my primary school were the best, especially if they had custard. I really loved the variety of desserts we'd have as well, like one day we'd have apple crumble and the other day we'd have something else. Christmas dinner would have a particularly interesting choice of jelly and ice cream. Now, could be either that a lot of people didn't like Christmas pudding or the fact that it had brandy in it, which would make some sense. But I don't really recall us having this as an option for Christmas dinner, which was kind of depressing because I love Christmas pudding with white sauce. As with all primary schools, though, we had our fair share of issues with the dinner ladies. There was this weird thing at my primary school where they would always try to fill up full tables before they started filling up another one. I remember one time when I was getting my food, one of the dinner ladies asked me to sit with people whom I didn't even know, just because there was one space available, and they wanted to fill it up. Not least thinking about there were people in front of me, and that I wanted to sit with my friends. But I was asked for whatever reason. Anyway, I just passed it off, and went along with sitting with my friends anyway. Big mistake. Was I'm eating my food, this dinner lady just sneaks up behind me and angrily takes my plate away, and practically forces me to sit somewhere else. I decided I was having none of it, so I just sat there and didn't eat. It was probably the first time and one of the only times I remember where I actually got away with something. After having lunch, you'd then be allowed on the yard to play. Of course, if it was raining, we'd be forced to stay inside, but then again, if it was nice and sunny, we'd be forced to go outside. So there's no middle option for choosing what you wanted to do, which makes sense, I guess. Likewise, at my primary school, we had a top yard, a bottom yard, and we also had the grass fields, one for everyone and one for the bigger kids. Basically, if the grass field was wet, and we'd be on the yard, and if the grass was dry, we'd be in the field, and may hell freeze over if you tried to go on the yard when it was dry, or the grass if it was wet. And if it started raining whilst we were outside, the dinner ladies were programmed to hustle up all the kids and take them inside as quickly as possible, even if it was just mildly spitting. One of the dinner ladies at my primary school was also the grandmother to 2 of the pupils, so rest assured if we didn't include them in our games, in 5 minutes time we'd all get told off by the dinner lady. You'd no doubt realise these were also the 2 most hated pupils in the school. And not just by the other pupils either. God forbid should you want to play a game of tag or blocky and you didn't include one of these 2, or Grandma Dindins would be rushing up the yard to give us all a piece of her mind. If we'd give in and let them play with us and they lost in something, then you can guess what they did. We were told to play fairly or not play at all. Sometimes we'd also ignore the dinner lady and just play as we wanted to originally, but then we'd be told that we weren't allowed to play the particular game, and if we were spotted playing it again, we'd be getting a right bollocking. Finally, when I was in year 5 and 6, there was a new thing added that we'd go for lunch 15 minutes later than the other pupils in the school to reduce queuing. So it made sense in a lot of ways. It allowed for the younger pupils to have food. And we got an extra 15 minutes outside as well, so it had its bonuses. Except that by the time we joined the queues, they were already the size of a flipping football field. For the extra 15 minutes we got for dinner playtime as well, we were practically forced onto the bottom yard, so the dinner ladies could keep an eye on us. Now, as we were 10 and 11-year-olds, some of us were quite rebellious about this, so we became thugs and stayed on the top yard for the extra 15 minutes, hiding behind a wall so that the dinner ladies wouldn't spot us as they did their regular checks to see if anyone was up on the top yard. There was one dinner lady who was quite laid back though, and despite spotting us on the top yard quite often, she didn't really care. So I don't want this video to go too long, so I'm going to leave this on part 1, and in part 2 I will talk about the secondary school I went to in the next episode of Growing Up Welsh. And rest assured, I have a lot of things to talk about there too. I'll also leave a link to Batchy's channel and his Growing Up Scottish series for people to have a look at. Also, feel free to leave your own experiences of primary school wherever you come from down in the comments below. So, thank you all so much for watching this episode of Growing Up Welsh. If you guys did enjoy it, don't forget to like, comment down below and subscribe to the channel. It'll help me a lot to get more videos like this. Also, don't forget to like my Facebook page on Twitter and on Twitch. And as always, I will see you all in the next video. But until then, goodbye.